Hey Explorers, today we're going to talk about the set championships that I played in this past weekend. I played at Common Ground Games in Dallas, Texas, finishing first place, and I got second place at Sci-Fi Factory in Keller, Texas. Both very well-ran events, great stores in our local DFW area. I ran a green-purple tempo deck I'm going to tell you about today. Okay, before we get into the deck today that I piloted this last weekend, I just want to talk about the tournaments themselves in general and kind of some things I learned about the set championships. First piece of advice I would say, if you can learn your local metagame before going into these tournaments, and you have the option to choose a deck that has favorable matchups against the most popular decks in your area, I really feel like in competitive Lorcana that's going to give you a huge advantage. I am blessed to be in a heavily populated area in the DFW area. We have 20-something gaming stores that were running set championships that you can go to locals. I'm very involved in the local scene. I know what most people are playing and what style of decks they're most likely going to be on. So that definitely gives me an advantage. I don't know if that's going to be the same for everyone, but if you only have one set championship to go to in your area and you know all of the people that go and most likely what deck they're going to play, if you have the option, choose a deck that has a good matchup versus those. Now, there's some decks that just have a good spread, period. They don't really have any amazing matchups, but they don't really have any bad ones either. Something like that, in my opinion, would be like the Ruby Amethyst deck. It's just very consistent. It can kind of lose to anything, but it can definitely beat anything as well. Probably a 50 to 55% matchup across the board. Some matchups might be a little bit better than others. But the reason I chose to play the Emerald Amethyst Tempo bounce deck is because I felt like it had a really good matchup versus the Ruby Sapphire item decks and the Ruby Amethyst bounce decks, which are the most popular by far in my local meta, especially at these competitive tournaments. So I learned how to play the deck in a couple days. I've got a lot of reps in it with it before these tournaments, and it really paid off. I didn't get paired against Blue Steel maybe one time, and I was able to squeak that one out. I think that matchup is pretty rough. The matchup versus Steel Song can be tough, but we'll talk about specific matchups and card choices as we get into the deck. So just wanted to kind of give my 2 cents about my experience of how things went and maybe help improve your placements in the coming weekend. Okay, so here's the deck that I piloted this past weekend. It's, for the most part, a pretty standard Emerald Amethyst Tempo bounce deck. I do kind of want to negate some misconceptions about the deck. I talked to a lot of people about the list the last week or so leading up to the events, and this deck is not really an aggro deck. I think that is a big common misconception with the deck and how people initially attempt to pilot it. This is very much a mid-range tempo deck. Now, don't get me wrong, you can have very, very aggressive aggro starts, and some of the matchups, that's what you're really going for, especially when you're on the play. But it doesn't always play out that way. And you can definitely play a very, very strong mid game and even have a shot in the late game. So we'll take a look at some of the card choices. We are going with 10 one-drops. We have 4 of the best one-drop in Emerald is Cursed Merfolk. And then we have 3 Rafikis and 3 the Chernabog's followers. So leading into that, the strongest curve out with this deck is going to be a turn 1 Cursed Merfolk into turn 2 Flynn Rider, especially on the play. Now, there's some matchups where you actually don't want that start. You, against like a Mufasa deck or Steel Song, you're actually trying to play a sort of a control deck in the early and mid game, and then you kind of switch into the aggro deck once you get control of the board. But looking at the 2 drops, obviously we've got the Madam Mim Fox, the Flynn Rider, and then the Ursula Deceiver. And then 3 drops, we've got the Madam Mim Fox, the Maleficent, the Merlin Crab, and then a card that some people are still not a huge fan of, but the Kit Cloudkicker. I've gone back and forth on this card. When it's good, it's really good. And then when it's not good, I mean, you can just ink it. If you really need a 3-drop that can sing Friends of the Other Side, it's fine. But when it's good, it's really good. It definitely won me some games against Steel Song and against the Amber Ruby Mufasa deck. Card is an all-star against those two decks, and also against other Ursula Deceiver of All decks. So if you can just keep stalling their board while you're progressing yours, you can run away with the game very easily. Looking at and then obviously the last 3-drop, Ursula Deceiver of All, the most powerful 3-drop in the deck. I want to say something on this card. This card can definitely be a mega trap for a lot of people. You don't have to go all in on this card, which is something that I thought when I first picked it up. I thought this was like an Ursula deck, but I mean, if you look at the list, you're only playing 7 songs that she can sing anyway. Now, if you have her in your opening hand with one of the songs, then great. But I mean, unless you know the coast is clear, especially against like Ruby Amethyst that might have something like the 2-drop Pinocchio that would just exert her and she'd get challenged and immediately taken out by a Rafiki, you don't always have to just slam her on 3. Like, if you played Ursula Deceiver on 2, you know what your opponent has in their hand, the coast is clear, by all means, play the Ursula Deceiver of All on 3 and go crazy. But if you're not sure what's going on, you could just play like 3-drop Maleficent or Crab or something that's going to get value as it comes into play. And you don't really care if they immediately have an answer for it. So it's a pretty big tempo loss. It's going to be pretty devastating to your game plan. If you just play Ursula Deceiver of All out and they immediately answer her, you can fall behind very quickly. So looking at the 4-drops, no surprise, we've got the 4 of the Merlin Goats, 4 of the Merlin Rabbits, another controversial card, the 2 6-drops that we have, the Yzmas. I'll talk a little bit about this card. I go back and forth. I did really enjoy having this card in my deck over this past weekend. Some of the obvious plays you can do with her is just target your own rabbit, shuffle it in, you draw 3 cards, 2 off of the Yzma ability and 1 off the rabbit. If you've already gotten value out of like an Ursula Deceiver, the 2-drop, and she's not adding much value to your game plan anymore, throw her back in, draw 2 cards, it's fine. I know a lot of people are not sure when to use this targeting their opponent's characters. I mean, don't target like one of your opponent's rabbits or something, but I'll be honest, I've never really seen Yzma come down, target one of my opponent's characters, or target any opponent's characters for that matter, and it be the wrong play. Like, sure, you're letting your opponent draw a couple extra cards, but again, this is a tempo deck. You're trying to keep control of the board for as long as possible, and then once you lose control of the board, which will happen a lot, then you just kind of shift into an aggro plan and try to close the game out as quickly as possible. So Yzma throwing back in, especially like an 8-drop Tamatoa or a 9-drop Maleficent Dragon or something like that, it's not the end of the world. And she is 4/4 bodies, she quests for 2, it's fine. And if you draw her in the early to mid game, you can just ink her. So I think it's fine. I like having just kind of the get out of jail free card in the late game. If you've still got a chance to close it out in the next few turns and she can buy you that extra turn that you need, then yeah, I think she still deserves a spot in the deck. And then the 7 songs, 4 Friends of the Other Side, 3 Mother Knows Best. You could definitely play 4 Mother Knows Best if you want. If you do that, I would just cut one of the Chernabog's followers or the Rafikis. Rafiki's going to be better against like steel decks to help combo with Crab to take out like a Robin Hood or something like that, or take out opposing Queen's Castle. So that's just kind of a metagame call, whatever you think you're going to be seeing. But I wouldn't play more Mother Knows Best unless something like Mufasa type decks or aggro decks are more prevalent in your area. So I would just keep it at 3 if it's like my local metagame, which is more Ruby Amethyst and Ruby Sapphire. The last card, my favorite card of the deck, the most powerful card in my opinion, one of the most powerful cards in the game right now, is Queen's Castle. Traditionally, these green-purple lists only play 3. I went up to 4. Green Steel discard was becoming more popular in my area too, and this card is an all-star in that matchup. But I think if you plan your games and your turns around setting up a Queen's Castle, you can win games that you definitely shouldn't have been able to. By that, I mean, if you played like a turn 2 Ursula, right, you know your opponent doesn't have something like a Maui or a Fox Crab combo or something to immediately take it out, it's worth just slamming on the board on turn 4, because this deck is so good at controlling the board in combat and challenging that, you know, if your opponent exerts 2 or 3 of their characters to just get some damage on it and they aren't able to take it out in one turn, you can like challenge back with Foxes and Crabs and Rafikis and get a lot of favorable trades in play. while keeping the castle there. And a lot of my games came down to securing a castle on 4, moving 2 characters there on turn 5, and just passing. And your opponent is just put in this box where they have to answer it right now. If I gain 2 to 4 extra lore and draw 3 to 4 or 5 extra cards, there's no way they're coming back from that game. So in my opinion, I would run for this card. I'm a big fan. I think it just takes some planning around. Don't be afraid to ink it. It's not the end of the world. It doesn't have to be your only game plan all the time. But I don't know. I think the card's too powerful not to play for it. So that's the deck. Honestly, nothing too crazy. Not any crazy innovations. But I just wanted to kind of explain maybe some misconceptions about the deck and the strategy. So let's talk about some specific matchups and some mulligan decisions you might come across. Okay, so first, let's just draw a hand with the deck, and we'll just kind of go over a mulligan as if we're in game 1, round 1, against an unknown opponent. We don't know what they're playing, and I'll just kind of talk about general opening strategies. Your mulligan decisions change quite drastically if you do know what your opponent is on, and in some of the matchups, it's also way different what your game plan is in on the play versus on the draw. So let's just pretend that we are on the play. It's game 1, it's round 1, we don't know what we're against. So we'll start off, we'll draw 7. So what I try to do, especially game 1 in the dark, if I'm on the play, I'm going to try to just go for the aggro draw, which means turn 1 Curse Merfolk, turn 2 Flynn Rider, or turn 1 Merfolk, turn 2 Merfolk, if you happen to draw the crazy opening like that. And I'm not really going to worry about my bounce effects, because the bounce effects are for more when you're trying to control the board, and most of the time you're on, especially on the play, you're just going to try to be the aggressor. So you want to go wide. You don't want to bounce any of your things. So I'm definitely going to keep Flynn Rider. I'm going to throw back the 4 drops, the 3 drops. I really want to find some 1 drops and some interaction. Yeah, I wouldn't even keep a crab, honestly, if I don't know what I'm playing against, because it's good in a lot of matchups, but not all. So I would just keep the 2, and then I'm going to look for some more 1 and 2 drops to just go as wide and as fast as possible. So we'll put 6 back. Cool. Okay. So we did find a 1 drop, and here's our full opening hand. So now we're going to have a 1 drop and a 2 drop to open up. We do have a 3 drop, a couple options. We'll have the fox or the crab, and that'll really just depend on what happens in the first few turns of the game. If you need to get control of the board and want to protect your Rafiki, cool. I would say we're definitely not going to drop the snake on turn 2. We're going to just develop our board. Turn 1 Rafiki, turn 2 Flynn. We'll just go through a few turns. The first card that I would ink from this opening hand, it would actually be the snake, because if we end up against another aggressive deck and need to get control of the board, it's going to be on turn 3 with fox. So, and I do want to keep castle, because if we're not against another aggressive deck and we're going to be the aggressor, then we're going to get to go like 1, 2, 3, 4, and the game might just end very soon after that if our opponent is like ruby sapphire items, or even against ruby amethyst if they don't have the tools they need to handle all that. So for turn 1, I would definitely just ink the snake. We would play the Rafiki, and then next turn for turn 2 we would draw. We got another 1 drop, but I would still just go ahead and go with 2. If I had 2 1 drops here, I would go 1 drop, but that's pretty rare case. And then again, this decision here would be kind of have to be determined on what we're playing against. So we'll go through a couple more turns. So for this sake, we'll say that we're not going to need the fox, and we're going to just still try to go as wide as possible. So we would ink that. We would play the Flynn. Most likely we would just get to quest with the Rafiki. So the next draw would be a Yzma. Well, I love drawing that on this turn, because that is the easiest ink decision of our life. So we would do that. And then, yeah, I mean, you would just throw the crab down. Maybe Rafiki gets targeted with the ability and takes out an opposing character's early play. Otherwise, you would just quest away with whatever you have. We'll do a turn 4, and then this would all just be situational. Most likely, the followers is going to get inked. Potentially, the crab is going to sing friends, depending on what our opponent's on. We're either going to play the rabbit or the castle, which is actually perfect. This is actually a really sweet opening draw, because if we're going to be the aggressor, then we get to play the queen's castle. If we're kind of trying to pump the brakes and we're worried that the castle would immediately just get taken out, cool. Then we'll just play the rabbit and go on from there. All right, so now we're going to talk about some individual matchups and very key cards that we're looking for. So if you know that you're playing against ruby sapphire items, these are the cards that are the most important that you look for in your opening hand. You are perfectly fine with multiple Cursed Merfolks. If you have all 4 in your opening hand, keep all 4 of them. You will end the game before they have a chance to do anything. So I am looking for Cursed Merfolks and Flynn Riders in the first 1 or 2 turns. Obviously, if you draw some of the other 1-drops, that's fine, but you really want Cursed Merfolk. I wouldn't throw back multiple 1-drops just digging for these, but I would definitely throw back like 3 drops, 4 drops, any of your bounce effects. Now, against Ruby Sapphire, in the early turns, especially the first 3 turns, you do not want to bounce any of your characters back to your hand. I know that it doesn't seem like always that intuitive, especially like a lot of people I'll see go turn 1 Cursed Merfolk, and they'll immediately want to like turn 2 Snake and return it back to their hand if they quest for 2. No, you want your Ruby Sapphire opponent to challenge into these early characters that make them discard, because they're not going to be able to keep up with having enough cards in their hand to ramp and be prepared and take out your characters in the early game. They're going to have to make some really hard decisions, and they're going to run out of cards. It's so funny in that matchup. You usually end up running them out of cards, especially if they don't have like the turn 3 or 4 Flaversham. But yeah, don't bounce these back. Now, if you get to the mid to late game and they've got like a Maui in play and they're challenging your guys and you think that they're going to be able to go down to 0 cards and just take these out for free, then yes, at that point, quest for 2, bounce it back, get more value out of it. And that's where you get the value out of your bounce characters. Obviously, you could bounce goats, bounce rabbits, what have you. But these are some of the most important cards to have. Next, I would keep 1 Ursula Deceiver of All in my opening hand against Ruby Sapphire, because unless they're on the play and they just like double ramp super hard, they're not going to be able to answer this before turn 4, when you'll be able to sing Friends of the Other Side twice and draw 4 cards. And that's usually enough to just overload the board, close out the game before they can even be prepared. Queen's Castle, be careful with this one. If you did have a turn 2 or turn 3 Ursula just before you played the Queen's Castle and you know that they don't have a Maui, then great. Definitely slam this down. Make it difficult for them, especially if your open is like 1, 2, 3, 4. Then their Maui's going to have to make a decision. Do I take out the Ursula so it can't double sing again? Or do I start putting damage on the Queen's Castle? You're basically just making it as awkward and as difficult for them as possible while you figure out how to close out the mid game before they completely take control of the board. Now, Ruby Sapphire is going to gain control of the board at some point, most likely, unless you just had like the absolute crazy aggro start and you close the game out before that happens. But most of the time, they are going to get control of the board, and that's okay. Quit trying to win the board. Now we're just trying to get as much lore out of our characters as possible, loop your bounce effects, go for your goats. If it's safe for a Queen's Castle, go for that. I wouldn't prioritize turn 2 Ursula Deceiver to try to hit. I mean, the only thing you're really going to hit out of them, is 1 chip ahead, which, get lucky, cool. It's not the end of the world for them. And be prepared, it's actually not even the end of the world for you. So don't prioritize this on turn 2. I'd much rather have, just 2 more 1-drops on turn 2 or a Flynn Rider. If you don't have Deceiver of All, cool, play this on 3. And then now if you see that there's no Maui or danger for your castle, slam this on 4. So this is our game plan against Ruby Sapphire. On the play, on the draw, regardless. So if you were able to scout in between rounds and you happen to know that's what you're playing against the next round, awesome. This is the game plan no matter what. Okay, now let's talk about the Ruby Amethyst matchup. In my opinion, that matchup is very favorable for this deck, but it is very hard to navigate, especially against a well-seasoned Ruby Amethyst player. I think that's going to be the case with pretty much any deck against Ruby Amethyst. The deck is very beatable. It's not like it was in Chapter 2, but it is not easy. They have different game plans. Some of them have like Surfer Mini with the evasive plan. Some are maxing out on Queen's Castles. Some are cutting dragons and going more aggressive. It's a really good deck. It draws a lot of cards. It controls the board very well. Obviously, they still play like Be Prepared and that sort of thing. My game plan against them, when I'm on the play, it's going to be pretty much the same game plan as it was against the Ruby Sapphire. I want to be the aggressor. I want to play Merfolk on 1, Flynn on 2. I want to run them out of cards as quickly as possible. Ursula Deceiver of All, again, hitting Be Prepared isn't that insane. We're usually trying to close out the game before that happens anyway. And even if we get to that point where hopefully we're like looping rabbits or have a Queen's Castle and play like the turn before, and we don't really care about Be Prepared. If you hit Friends on the Other Side, cool. But Ursula Deceiver is still a very, very powerful card in the matchup, just to see what your opponent has in their hand. Don't get discouraged if you don't hit a song. It's very, very valuable to know what your opponent has. So Queen's Castle, they're going to have Queen's Castles as well. If you don't see a Maui in their hand off of the Ursula Deceiver, cool. Slam this. Now, they could have a combination, just like we could, of like Rafiki with the Fox. If they have that, be wary of that, but the easiest thing they have to take it out is going to be Maui. I wouldn't prioritize Queen's Castle in this matchup. It's such a tricky card, kind of from both sides. Both decks have very good tools to take it out if you have the cards in your hand. A lot of times one person will run low on cards, but if they can secure a castle and put 2 characters there, they'll run away with the game very, very quickly. So there's also a lot of boards where Mother Knows Best double saying off of an Ursula is really powerful, especially if their board is like, a snake where they already had to bounce one of their own characters, and then like a fox or something, and you just put all of it back into their hand. Can be pretty devastating, especially if they're on the play. If you don't have Flynn on 2, I do like Ursula on turn 2 instead, to see what your opponent has, especially to see if they have one of the 2-drop Pinocchios that can exert your 3-drop Ursula Deceiver of All. If they don't, slam this card, double sing Friends, double sing Mother Knows Best, just go crazy. But if you see the Pinocchio, then wait. Most likely they'll use it on like a Flynn or, a crab or a rabbit or whatever. And then once they've used it, hopefully they may or may not have bounce effects, obviously, to reuse it or whatever. And if that's the case, if you see their hand is like Pinocchio and like 2 bounce effects, just ink Ursula. Don't waste a turn playing this. Play something where you're going to get immediate value out of a come into play ability. And then that's fine. You can just sing these off of something else, just hard cast them. It's not a big deal. It's not the end of the world. So this matchup is going to come down to if you can have an aggressive start, make them discard cards off of these, and then whoever can keep control of the board while also maintaining a lot of card advantage. I mean, bouncing recurring rabbits, keeping a lot of cards in your hand, and just keep playing things to the board. You can definitely lose control of the board against Ruby Amethyst when they start slamming stuff like Lady Tremaine, Madam Medusa. Be aware of all that, and that's okay when that happens. Just go into full aggro mode and like try to start looping your 2 questers and that sort of thing. I wanted to mention Chernabog's followers in this matchup. You can usually tell when your opponent might start going for this. Now, they're going to prioritize your 2 questers first. So if you can get a couple lore out of this, and then you think, okay, next turn, most likely they're going to challenge it, quest it, banish it, draw the card, get the value out of it. Don't let them just, take this away for free if they do. Not the end of the world, but just be mindful of that. It has another ability. So, yeah. So in this matchup, on the play, be the aggressor. On the draw, I would still prioritize Cursed Merfolk and Flynn Riders, but since your opponent has the ability to draw a lot of cards too, it is okay to like go ahead and like snake the Cursed Merfolk and, have this 3/3 in play that can challenge their guys. Don't let them just like go wide and be the aggressor and lose control of the board. Utilize your crabs, your Madam Mim foxes, your snakes, and that sort of thing. And it's really just an attrition war. I would highly advise, if you can, playtest with a buddy if you're going to try this deck against Ruby Amethyst before the set championships. But I do think it's a very favorable matchup. I lost to it once, I think, out of 6 or 7 matches over the 2 tournaments I played last weekend. And one of them was in the finals against a very, very good Ruby Amethyst player. So didn't even feel bad. But I do think it's favored, but you're going to need some practice, going to need some reps. These are going to be some of the cards that I'm going to focus on finding. I'll mention again Crab and like Rafiki. Don't let your opponent set up a favorable turn to slam their own Queen's Castle. Make sure you have a game plan just in case they do. You can kind of get in this mindset on the draw that you're the aggressor and you go like, Merfolk, Flynn, Singer, Ursula, and then they go like turn 4 castle and you're just like, oh no. All of my characters have like 1 to 0 attack. So, Rafiki's really good for that matter. Crab's going to be really good for that matter. You can combo Madam Mim Fox with the Crab too. And the Fox and the Crab, combined is just 7 damage immediately to just take it out in one shot. So just, be mindful of that. All right. And last but not least, I'm going to just kind of go over the steel deck matchups in general. Now, there are a couple different nuances. We'll talk about that. But the game plan against steel decks in general is pretty much the same. Especially like green steel and blue steel, unless they're specifically playing like Rise of the Titans, which some people play 1 or 2, some don't. A lot of people have just mainly focused on item disruption, so they're just like all in on binges instead of just the Rise of the Titans, because at least it's a body. Rise of the Titans is, for the most part, a pretty bad card, but steel decks kind of need it in general. They're really worried about locations, but the steel matchups are why I'm playing 4 castles. If they don't have Rise of the Titans, a lot of the times they don't have enough attack power in play to just immediately take care of it. So we're usually not wanting to just go crazy on the Cursed Merfolk Flynn Rider plan. Now, if you're on the play against like Steel Song or something, sure, go for it. If you think that they're going to have to challenge into your characters and discard, great, that's amazing. But if you think they're going to be able to like turn 3 or 4, you know, Tinkerbell or Swords or something, then it's not the greatest. Those cards lose a lot of value when they just get banished without your opponent having to challenge into them. So against like Steel Song, you're kind of the board control deck. Stuff like Rafiki and Madam Mim and Fox. You know, if I do have a Cursed Merfolk on one, cool. I'm probably going to bounce it back pretty quick with something like Madam Mim. Snake, I want to get more toughness in play so they don't just like immediately get banished by, you know, some of their Steel Songs or their removal spells and of like that sort of thing. Against Steel, in general, Green Steel, Steel Song, Blue Steel, with hands down, no question, the most important card is 2-drop, Ursula, Deceiver. You want this, do not mulligan this card against them. You want this on turn 2, you want to see what they got in their hand, you want to get Whole New World, you want to get Grab Your Swords, you want to get any of their removal spells, Along Came Zeus, all that good stuff. Play this on turn 2. Take their best song, take the song that they can play the quickest, especially if you have one of your bounce effects. If you see that they have multiple songs, prioritize bouncing it as soon as possible and replaying it again. Get all of their songs out of their hands, and then your board presence and your card draw and that sort of thing is going to be able to take over the game. And especially if you know what they have in their hands and that's your main game plan, you're going to know if your Queen's Castle is going to be safe on turn 4. So your opponent can keep like Hold the World, Grab Your Swords, all that good stuff, and think that they've just got it. You slam this on 2 and you just disrupt their entire game plan. So Mother Knows Best is a really good card against Steel Song and can be okay against Blue Steel. Against Blue Steel, you don't even necessarily have to sing this. Just bouncing back like one of their shift characters that they spent 2 turns setting up is going to be really strong. But be careful with Ursula. If you 3-drop like Deceiver of All, the singer, if you didn't have this on turn 2 and you don't know if the coast is clear, you may not want to go all in on this. Play something else that gets, you know, value as soon as it comes into play, like we talked about before. But if the coast is clear, cool. Do this. Normally, against Steel decks or Whole New World decks, right, you usually don't prioritize drawing a lot of cards. But since our game plan is to rip Whole New World out of their hand, then, yeah, go crazy. Double draw with Friends of the Other Side. You can do rabbit stuff. Queen's Castle can close out the game pretty quickly. But, yeah, I mean, the game plan against Steel across the board is prioritized the same. 2-drop Ursula is the most important. Bounce it back, replay it, get all their songs out of their hand. I had one game against Blue Steel where they had 2 cards left in their hand, and I basically gained control of the board, but they did have 1 5-drop Robin Hood. So I played Ursula on 2, and they revealed 2 Whole New Worlds in their hand. So I immediately took one, I sung Mother Knows Best with one of my 3-drops, targeting my own Ursula Deceiver to immediately just play it again in the same turn and take the second Whole New World, and now their whole game plan was just destroyed. So I gained control of the board immediately, slammed Queen's Castle, game was over in like 3 or 4 turns. So that's the plan against Steel. Alright, Explorers, that's the deck in a nutshell. That's the game plan. Brief overview of some of the matchups that you will most likely see at your local set championships. I have 2 more this weekend coming up on this coming Saturday and Sunday. I'm going to do my best to get a full play set of Stitches. Not keeping my hopes up. I'm just trying to play Lorcana. I'm trying to have a good time, trying to have fun. Obviously, winning feels great. But if you don't, just enjoy playing like the best card game that's out right now, right? We're playing Disney cards. I'm having a blast. I'm making a lot of new friends. So yeah, if you have any other questions about this Emerald Amethyst Tempo, not necessarily aggro deck, you're kind of aggro sometimes, any specific matchups or card choices, let me know in the comments. And good luck to you this weekend. Let me know. I'd love to see any of you, how you do, if you make top 8, if you win a Stitch. Yeah, good luck. Have fun. We'll see you next time.